In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, peace be upon you. Welcome to another episode of From the Desk of Ghamidi. Our series of conversations carries on in the 23 question series, and today we are set to start the 138th episode. Today's topic for discussion is what is Hadith? This is our fourth session on this particular topic. Let's begin. Thank you, Ghamidi Sahab, for giving us your time. The Hadith are historical records of the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. What is the history of these historical records? We aim to understand this through the ages, starting with what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself said about the history of Hadith during his lifetime, and then begins the era of the companions, starting with Abu Bakr Siddiq. Ghamidi Sahab, you highlighted three essential questions. The Prophet, peace be upon him, had forbidden the writing of these records. Was this a permanent prohibition? Abu Bakr's approach was also notable. Permission to share hadiths orally was granted, and Abu Bakr's stance on this issue was clear. Following this, if someone reports a hadith, how is it verified? What standards are applied? For these three questions, you have outlined the complete actions taken by Abu Bakr. I'd like you to link back to that discussion and expand on the era of Umar, which follows after Abu Bakr. May God be pleased with them both. Umar is recognized as one of the prominent Caliphs of the Rashidun Caliphate. What was his viewpoint on this whole matter?
Your summary is precise, and you have incorporated all three issues. We have detailed the actions of Abu Bakr Siddiq, may God be pleased with him. I mentioned that initially we would discuss the approaches of the Rashidun Caliphs. After Siddiq, Umar was his successor. His stature is well known. In a nutshell, his actions were precisely in line with those seen in Siddiq's practices. May God be pleased with him. I will provide the details now. What was the first consideration? It was whether the Prophet, peace be upon him, had intended the prohibition on writing to be everlasting. I have mentioned that Siddiq did not interpret it that way. He understood it to be a precautionary measure directed by the Prophet, peace be upon him, to ensure the protection of the Quran. Umar viewed it similarly, as we have argued that Siddiq himself had compiled a collection of these teachings, supporting the view that he did not see this as a permanent restriction. The same perspective was evident with Umar. May God be pleased with him. The report I will now present to you is also cited by Bayhaqi and appears in Tadribur Ravi, referenced on page 151 of that text. I am quoting from Al-Hadith wal Muhaddisun. Reported by Urwa bin Zubair, he states, Ana Umar ibn al-Khattab arada ayn yaktuba sunan. Just as Sayyidina Siddiq had planned to document the sayings pertaining to the Prophet Muhammad, similarly, Umar, may God be pleased with him, decided to record the practices and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad, which he was known to have performed. فَاشْتِشَارَ فِي ذَلِكَ أَشَابَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. In this matter, he sought the advice of the companions. فَأَشَارُوا عَلَيْهِ أَيْنْ يَكْتُبَهَا. They advised that it was a good idea and should be documented. From this, it is clear that those companions who came for consultation, obviously with leadership then being in Muslim hands, all agreed that this prohibition was not everlasting. Given the context of protecting the Quran, the Prophet, peace be upon him, had offered this advice strictly as a precaution and issued this directive. Now, since the final recitation of the Quran has concluded, it is well preserved in people's possession. There is no risk of confusion about its origin anymore. It is no longer the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, either for someone to claim they had heard directly from him. Therefore, recording these narrations, that is, compiling the existing body of knowledge into a book or books, poses no risk. فَأَشَارُوا عَلَيْهِ أَيْنْ يَكْتُبَهَا. They gave the same advice. فَتَفِكَ عُمَرْ يَسْتَخِرُ اللَّهِ فِيهَا. Umar remained unconvinced. He continued to seek divine guidance through istikhara for a month. Atafika Umar yastakhirullah fiha shahran. He kept seeking divine guidance for a month. That is, he continuously prayed to God that if this action is beneficial, his heart should find peace in it. And if there is any error in it, it should be made clear to him.
So he too had reservations.
Clearly, his reservations were concerning whether compiling these things into a book alongside the Quran might cause confusion. That is, could a problem arise He would later express his hesitation, as we'll see. So, he continued seeking guidance for a month. Summa asbaha yawman wa qad azamallahu lahu. Then one day he awoke feeling that he had received divine guidance to make a decision. Faqal, he said, Inni kuntu aradtu an naktuba sunan. I had intended to document the practices of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Wa inni zakartu qawman kanu qablakum katabu kutuban fa'alayha wa taraku kitab Allah. Yet I considered our predecessors, who had existed before us, they too had written books of narrations, and then became beholden to them, and subsequently discarded the book of God. Notice here, he is contemplating another perspective, that is, if another book is compiled alongside the book of God, then people might focus more on it because it contains stories and narratives and obviously accounts of battles too, which might draw their interest, and they might neglect the Quran. That is, the book of God might be sidelined. Thus, he stated, Wa inni wallahi la albisu kitab Allahi bi shayyin navada. Hence, I have resolved that I will not allow anything else to intermingle with the book of God. This insight allows us to understand that he too experienced a similar dilemma as Abu Bakr Siddiq, may God be pleased with him. Similarly, he had planned, although he had already compiled the book, he continued seeking guidance through istikhara for a month, and the individuals he consulted, certainly they must have been prominent companions who had advised in favor of it. Yet, Umar, may God be pleased with him, remained unsatisfied, and then he declared that he too feared that we might become like the nation which had surrendered themselves to narrations and overlooked the book of God.
Indeed.
Bearing this in mind, he made his decision, just as Abu Bakr Siddiq had disapproved of the idea of documenting them. I too will not proceed, as there is a risk that it might blend with the book of God, or something might overshadow the book of God, or something might become the focal point for the people. These are the various considerations taken as precautionary measures, which he kept in mind while making his decision. However, it becomes clear that he too believed that the directive of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was not intended to be permanent. It was based on the concern that some harm could arise. We too must evaluate whether the risk of such harm still exists or not. This was his rationale. Now consider the other matter after this. The second point was about whether the narration should be stated. To address this, first I will present to you the narration of Karala bin Kab, quoted by Imam Zahabi in his book Tazkiratul Hufaz. I am reading from this book. He states, Lama Sayyirana Umar ilal Iraq. When Umar, may God be pleased with him, sent us to Iraq, he used to dispatch various groups. Masha ma'ana Umar, Umar accompanied us when the companions departed. Similar instances are also recorded. Abu Bakr Siddiq would accompany them outside. Umar would also come out. Waqal, and he said, Atudruna lima shayyatukum. Do you understand why I have come with you? Qalu naam takrimatul lana. Yes, we believe it is to honor us. This had been the tradition of the Rashidun Caliphates. They accorded such respect to the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him. They also felt that he was seeing us off and sending us on a mission, so they felt it appropriate that they come out to pay their respects. Qal. Umar said, وَمَا ذَلِكْ إِنَكُمْ تَتُونَ أَهْلَ كَرِيَاتٍ لَهُمْ دَاوِيٌّ بِالْقُرْآنِ قَدَاوِيَ النَّهَلِ. There is another reason for it. This is true, I have come out to honor you, but another important point is that you will encounter people reciting the Quran there, and their recitation of the Quran will be continuous like the buzzing of bees. فَلَا تَصُدُوا هُمْ بِالْأَحَادِيثِ وَتَشْهُرُهُمْ. Do not distract them by recounting hadiths and engaging them in them.
How curious.
Jaridul Quran. The Quran should remain distinct from everything else. This directive has also been stated in various other narrations too. That is, to prevent any confusion between the Quran and anything else. Obviously, this refers to confusion in writing, reading, and distraction in focus. All are intended. He says, وَجَرِدُ الْقُرْآنِ, considering all these aspects, وَأَقِلُ الرِّوَايَةَ الرَّسُولِ اللَّهِ, and narrate from the Prophet, peace be upon him, as infrequently as possible. This indicates that he does not imply that narrating from the Prophet is inherently wrong. Rather, it should be done sparingly. The fewer the narrations, the more careful you will be. When done sparingly, it will be thoroughly researched. When it is done sparingly, you will ensure nothing is falsely attributed to the Prophet of God. Another aspect is that it should be done only when necessary. That is, it isn't that you sit and share stories, you keep reciting hadiths, only share them when something relevant or significant comes to mind. You should narrate it, as it was stated, Akilur riwaya ar-Rasulillah, narrate infrequently in reference to the Prophet of God. Wa ana sharihukum. Now proceed, I am with you. This is said at the time of departure. Now listen. Falama qadima Qarza ibn Ka'b. When Qarza bin Ka'b reached his destination, Qalu, the locals said, Hadithna, tell us some hadith. The locals would generally request this. As they are the companions of the Prophet, they have come. Tell us something about him. We would do the same too. It's a natural demand. Share some of his teachings or incidents about him. Faqal, he replied, Nahana, Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar has forbidden us from this. That is, they too adhered to the same guidelines. That is, share as little as possible. And he says that they, following his instructions, refrained from it completely. From this, you can deduce that there wasn't much difference in his approach and the approach of Siddiq, may God be pleased with him. Consider another aspect of it, that is, how strict he was in this regard. This narration is from Abu Huraira, may God be pleased with him. He states that someone asked him, the narrator states that he had asked him, Akunta tu hadisu fi zamani Umar ha kaza, like the way you share narrations now and have people listen to narrations in these gatherings.
Okay.
Did you share narrations in the times of Umar, may God be pleased with him as well? Faqal, he replied, Law kuntu hadisu fi zamani Umar mislama uhaddisukum la zarabani bi mikhtatihi. If I had shared these narrations in the times of Umar, then he would have punished me with his whip. He was very strict in this regard. Under no circumstances would he allow this. Imam Zahabi has described this approach in his book. He says, وَكَانَ عُمَرْ مِنْ وَجِيلِهِ يُخْتِيَ الصَّاحِبُ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ يَأْمُرُهُمْ مَنْ يُقِلُ الرَّوَايَةَ عَنْ نَبِيهِمْ وَلِأَلَّا يَتَشَغِلَ النَّاسُ بِالْأَحَادِيثِ عَنْ حِفْظِ الْقُرْآنِ. Obviously, he has made this statement considering all the narrations that Umar, fearing that a companion does not err in attributing something to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and in this process does not misattribute something to the Prophet of God, he instructed them to narrate as little as possible in reference to the Prophet. And this directive was also to ensure that people do not become preoccupied with hadiths instead of memorizing and prioritizing the Quran. This is the conclusion drawn by him, that is, a renowned Imam of ours, and this was the practice he adhered to. Bearing this in mind, he also believes that this approach of Umar, may God be pleased with him, was also recognized by the hadith scholars of later periods. That is, hadith narration should be minimal, that is, the attitude of excess should not be there. If a hadith is mentioned, it should be scrutinized. It isn't that someone has heard something and there was no doubt about the companions that they would intentionally misattribute something to the Prophet of God. However, for later periods, the principle that it should be scrutinized, and if there are narrators involved in this, then their biographies and their characters should be examined. This wasn't a simple decision. It was Umar who became the example for the hadith scholars. So, he states, وَهُوَ الَّذِي سَنَّ لِلْمُحَدِّثِينَ تَسَوُّتَ فِي النَّقْلِ. It was Umar, may God be pleased with him, who established this practice for the hadith scholars. That is, he set up this method and the expert scholars of hadith followed it. That is, if a point is being conveyed in reference to the Prophet, peace be upon him, then the method of investigation must be applied to it. That is, testimonies might be necessary for it, or other sources might need to be researched, or if the narrators are to be examined, then this must be done. وَرُبَّمَا كَانَ يَتَوَقَّفُ فِي كَبَارِ الْوَاحِدِ إِذَا ارْتَابَ. And it often happened that whenever they had some doubt, obviously, if the matter is straightforward and it doesn't raise any concerns, then it does not necessitate such scrutiny. However, if they encounter something doubtful or suspicious, then they would opt to withhold judgment on the matter of a solitary report. They would not accept it readily. With this, one can surmise that when the third point is before us, that is, Umar followed the very practice of Siddiq, that is, the hadith should be used sparingly, and if a hadith comes before them, and if it is necessary, if it pertains to knowledge and needs to be cited. Even Umar has mentioned many things, Siddiq too had done so. So, if a directive or decision has indeed been made there, which might affect us or our understanding of the Quran, Sunnah, or a novel application, obviously it would be mentioned by attributing it to the Prophet of God, then it would be thoroughly investigated, that is, the nature of the matter would be examined, who is the one saying it, and the manner in which it has been narrated. As soon as he becomes strict about it, that is, in terms of narration and also in terms of acceptance, in terms of narrating, they desire it to be minimal in quantity, and in terms of acceptance, they emphasize that nothing should be accepted without scrutiny. Here Zahabi states that it went to the extent that Ana Umar Habasa Salasatan, Umar imposed restrictions on 3 companions.
Okay.
You could say he might have confined them. That is, it might be that he ordered them to stay within their homes, or they were not allowed to narrate something. The term can be interpreted in both ways.
An aspect of discipline?
Who are these Habasa Salasa? Ibn Masud.
Allahu Akbar.
Just consider the stature of his personality. Wa Abba Darda wa Abba Masudin al-Ansari, that is, he had restricted these companions. فَقَالْ قَدْ أَكْسَرْتُمُ الْحَدِيثًا الرَّسُولِ اللَّهِ. You have begun narrating too many hadiths attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Therefore, adopt a minimalist approach to it. You should think carefully before narrating. It should be narrated only when necessary. This point was emphasized to them repeatedly. An incident involving Abbas is also recounted due to this approach of Umar. It concerned his house next to Masjid Nabvi. Umar wanted to expand the Masjid-e-Nabvi. He cited a hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, regarding his house. So Umar asked for another person to corroborate it. Now, Abbas was the Prophet's, peace be upon him, uncle, and not just that, Umar held him in high regard. The Prophet, peace be upon him too, had a deep respect for him. We know of an incident when Umar said that they turned to him for prayers. While the Prophet, peace be upon him, was alive, they would ask him for prayers, and now after him, it is his uncle whom they refer to. He was a significant figure. So, he asked him to present a witness or proof for what he was stating. This request was made to him. Obviously, that testimony was provided. People confirmed his claim. At that point, he asked for forgiveness and said that by no means did he doubt him. Rather, وَلَكِنِي أَحْبَبْتُ عَلَى تَصَوَّتْ. My intention was just this, and I prefer that, without due diligence, nothing should be accepted attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. First, we should investigate the matter and about the subject it relates to, and we should verify the person who is stating it, and even then, if another witness is requested, then there is nothing wrong with that. These were the considerations that were in my mind to investigate this matter. Throughout the life of Umar, we do not find him deviating from this practice. That is, if we summarize all 3 points regarding the writing of the narrations and compiling them into a book, he followed exactly the same methodology as Siddiq and desired to record narrations and preserve this entire history. He consulted with the companions as well, however. After seeking divine guidance through istikara for a month, he ultimately decided not to proceed with it. Those who were reporting the narrations were repeatedly instructed to do so minimally. Minimally means it should be done only when necessary, when it is essential to use them. If something is to be narrated, it should be done with thorough research and avoid narrating stories and organizing gatherings to share narrations, and storytelling should not become our practice. He was extremely careful in this regard that no confusion with the Quran should occur. People should not neglect the Quran and start getting involved in these matters. Considering all these aspects, he kept reminding people repeatedly. When something was to be stated, then the approach was one of research and investigation. It would be investigated, studied, and if an exceptional situation arose, then testimonies would also be required, and a witness would be sought from the companions, like in the case where Siddiq had asked for a witness. This was the approach of Umar. Like I said at the beginning, there is essentially no difference in the approaches of both Siddiq and Umar regarding this. After this, two Rashidun Caliphs, that is, Usman and Ali, remain. We learn about them that regarding writing, they too never took any steps other than this. Indeed, not just them, the Caliphs of later periods as well, with regard to the state-level transcription of the Hadiths, or at the Caliphs level, avoided making any arrangement for it. That is, they never set up anything of this kind. So, for the initial phase, we learn that whatever the approach of the two sheikhs was, that is, the approach of Siddiq and Farooq, may God be pleased with them, the same approach was followed by the other Caliphs. That is, the way of the Rashidun Caliphs was also the same, and the Caliphs of later periods also followed the same script. The second point, that is, the statement of the narrations, clearly shows that, in this case, the same strict measures were not maintained. That is, after Umar, the goal was also that whatever needed to be reported had already been reported. So, now there isn't any particular risk. We do not find any evidence of their warning people in this way, or that they had been strict in this regard. Rather, one narration clarifies that the strictness maintained until the times of Umar gradually gave way to leniency.
Okay.
I am presenting that narration to you as well. This narration is cited in the same Tazkiratul Hufaz by Imam Zahabi. He says, Muawiyah, may God be pleased with him, used to say this. It is his narration. Alaykum min al-hadisi bima kana fi ahdi Umar. You should consider only those narrations that were known in the times of Umar. فَإِنَّهُ كَانَ قَدْ أَكَفَ النَّاسَ فِي الْحَدِيثِ الرَّسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. For he had made the people quite wary regarding the hadiths of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This clearly shows that after him, the attitudes had become more relaxed. I am saying that there might have been reasons for it. Nevertheless, from his narration, we understand the strictness maintained in the times of Siddiq or in the times of Umar did not persist in later periods. The same applies to tasawwut, that is, firstly, they did not face any such delicate issues. Neither Usman nor Ali, may God be pleased with him, or if such issues were encountered too, perhaps those narrations were already known to them. Therefore, no witnesses were demanded for them, and the general approach that prevailed was that the narrations should be used sparingly. However, if an issue arises, then people may inquire about it, since perhaps no such instances appeared at that time. Hence, those are not mentioned in our narrations. From this, we may conclude the approach of the Rashidun Caliphs, and that we have covered. Following this, we must consider what methodology was adopted by the other companions.
Ghamidi Sahab, Hadith being the historical record of the knowledge and deeds of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, what is the history of this historical record? We are exploring it era by era. After Abu Bakr, the era of Umar is complete. What were their stances regarding all 3 points? We attempted to clarify this as much as possible. We will continue the discussion and we will try to understand the approach adopted by the rest of the companions for all these 3 situations. Our time is up for now. We will be back to serve you again. Thank you very much for your time so far.
Thank you very much.